Hello and welcome back to another episode of Just Stories with BT, the podcast. I'm extremely excited today to welcome Sandra Campos, the CEO of Project Verte and the founder of Fashion Launchpad. So welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Brett. You're amazing, and I love what you're doing. So thanks for doing it for everyone.
Yes, I appreciate that. So this is exciting because I love shows where I don't know the people at all. So we just met like what, 7 minutes ago or something like that. So I've
Yeah,
got a
we're just
great
sitting down on
background.
the sofa chatting.
Yes, exactly. And I like it because, as you're telling stories, it'll all be new to me. So I'll be learning about you. And I love reading your background, and I've been following you on LinkedIn for a long time. And so I'm excited to talk and share. And at the end of the day, one of the things I always do on the show is I like to introduce you for the audience, right? So that way it takes the pressure off. You don't have to talk about yourself. And so I will do that now. And then afterwards, tell me where I went wrong or what I got right. Sound good?
Great.
Awesome. So, as I said, this is Sandra Campos, and I'm going to introduce you in about 30 to 45 seconds. That's my goal. So, here we go. Okay. So, she was born in Hollywood, first generation Mexican American. Her parents were immigrants. They moved to LA, but she grew up in El Paso as a kid. And then as she got older, moved to Grand Prairie, Texas. She was into a lot of musical instruments, played the French horn, which was really cool. She was into cheerleading. She collected all kinds of different magazines and pictures of athletes. And then one thing that you said I love is that you used to arrange your furniture and your drapes to whatever was on trend, which is funny because I think that's probably the last thing I would have ever done in my life as a child. Your first job was at a water park, and I love this story, which is you and your friends got the job and you drew sticks for who would do what job, and your friends got to work in the ice cream shop, and meanwhile you had to work in the sanitization department, and you said that stuck with you, so I'm going to ask you about that in a minute. During high school, you were into cheerleading, you were into all kinds of different groups. That led you into going to college at Texas Tech University, where you were a cheerleader, you were a sorority, VP of the Pledge. You participated in a sorority Miss Texas beauty pageant. We'll have to talk about that. After school, you moved to NYC, where it was tough sledding in the beginning. You had to work 3 jobs to make it work. So we'll come back to that. But it led you into a really amazing career. And I liked how you explained it, that it was like one of these, right? It wasn't just, I got a job and worked my way up the ladder. You were at Polo, Nautica, Oscar de la Rent. You had a business with Selena Gomez for a while, all these different stages. And that ended up, a couple years ago with you launching Fashion Launchpad and then becoming the CEO of Project Verte, which is awesome. Along the way, you had 3 beautiful kids. You have 2 rescue dogs, a rescue cat, 8 rescue horses, which we got to talk about. And then here you are, you made it through the pandemic. I know you said you've been living at your farmhouse where the horses are during the pandemic, which is cool. And then here we are on the Just Stories with BT podcast.
Well done in 30, 45 seconds.
Yes. So what did I miss? Was there what was the anything major that I didn't get?
Oh, let's see. My 3 kids were pretty major, so you got that right. I would put them at the top of the list.
Yeah.
No, I mean, listen, what you said and how you described it is really, of course, that has taken many years and several decades of being in the retail industry. And it was something you talked about, the drapes and changing the furniture. It just was something that I always knew I really liked. I liked to go to fabric stores and find and look at magazines and find what I thought was on trend, at Texas at the time for the amount of knowledge that I had. And my mother thankfully just let me make changes. So I was slip covering sofas, pillows, changing the curtains, putting bows on things because that was what was important back then. Yes. But yeah, so, it just was an industry that I always knew I wanted to get into. And, I on the one hand, I'm fortunate that I knew what I wanted to do. And I moved to New York City when I was 20 years old and started doing it. On the other hand, I always try to recommend to my kids and other younger generations that try various things because there's a lot that you can learn and that really does go across industries. One of the things I think you may have missed there, just that is and has been pivotal and instrumental for me, was when I was growing up, my parents had a tortilla factory, and we would spend nights, weekends, days after school, whenever they needed, whatever we needed, and they needed extra help to hit deadlines, etc. We would spend time at the tortilla factory. And I was on every part of the different lines, whether it was the production line in terms of the dough or packing the tortillas. And I like to tell the story about the packing the tortillas because I really remember, and I have pictures where I would eat one and then pack one and eat one and pack one. It was kind of like that old Lucille Ball show where they were eating the chocolate balls as they were coming on the conveyor belt. It was pretty much like that. And I still to this day pretty much eat a tortilla a day. So, but with that experience, I worked in the back and when the trucks would come and the packing the boxes and in the warehouse. And so I didn't understand until much, much later exactly what was really ingrained in me and what I took from that experience of seeing my entrepreneurial parents, what they had to do to really get their business off the ground and to make sure that they were hitting all their deliveries for their clients. So, now fast forward, I'm in the world of logistics and supply chain, and I go back to that, remembering those experiences.
No, that's awesome. I love that. It was funny. I was actually having, two different conversations yesterday with some people on my team at Avocado because, when you oversee retail, a lot of times, retail, it falls in different people's career path. Sometimes they're just out of college. Sometimes they love retail. Sometimes it's a pathway to something else. And we were talking about, I have a few people on my team that are very talented, went to school for design or for art or these different things, and they love what they're doing. But we were having a conversation around, hey, how can we get you more experience to blossom in these other things? Because I want them to do more than just what they're doing day to day, And I think you're so right because I speak, pre-pandemic, I would always go back and speak at San Diego State where I went to school every year. And the kids would always ask, they always do, right? Like, what's the best career advice or whatever? And I always say, at the end of the day, my recommendation is if you can work for a small startup or an entrepreneurial company out of the gates, do it. Because what'll happen is you'll have to do about 1,000 different things. So when you work with a small company, you wear all these hats. So just like when you're at the tortilla factory, you're doing all these different things and you don't realize probably as a kid, like, oh, wow, I'm learning about this and this and this. I'm just eating chips and packing or whatever. But at the end of the day, when you work with a smaller company, that's the experience you get. Just like you said, your path was all over and you pick up these things everywhere. And I had that opportunity in my career at one of the stops I had where I had to do a ton of things. And I look back now going, man, that was the best 3 years of my career because I learned so much, even though at the time I was like, what am I doing? But I would figure it out.
It's so true. It's so true. And I agree with you on that front. I also think kids who grow up with entrepreneurial parents, are learning through osmosis and being able to kind of take in and be a part of my kids were certainly, because I was a single parent for them for 16 years. And when they were little, they would listen to conversations I was having with Selena's agents, or they would come and be on the trailer when we were filming the first commercial and other things that they've heard and they've seen and heard negotiations. And it really is kind of amazing because my 19-year-old son, who's now going to be going to college in LA at Loyola Marymount, he knows so much about P&Ls and financial reporting that I never knew at that age.
Yeah.
And I said to him, I said, how did you know that? He said, well, I have been around you for my whole life.
Yeah, that is awesome. So tell me, back to the intro, how was it? Obviously, like you said, first generation Mexican-American, you were born here, your parents, how long had your parents been here before they had you?
Oh, only a handful of years. I have an older sister who actually lives in San Diego. She's a judge there, but they had my older sister, and then 3 years later they had me. So it was not very long at all. My parents, kind of did the, I would say, standard thing back then, which was get married very young. My mom was 18 and my dad was 19, and then they started having kids right away. So
Wow.
it was very soon. And the whole immigrant piece of it, which, I think the older you get and the more experiences you have, and now, of course, that we're so much more awake as a country about what's happening with these different generational movements and social causes, that now I look back and I can truly understand the challenges that my parents had in finding work and, trying to learn the language and overcoming certain obstacles that were facing them. And, just through the years, what it took to actually become a citizen and bringing your family over. And one of the things that for sure, as a Latina, and I'm sure other cultures as well, but you're there for your family. So we had several times when even learning the tortilla business, my family moved in with my father's uncle's family and they had 10 kids. And we were there while he was learning the tortilla business. And then when we
Yeah.
went and my father had a tortilla business, then my father's sister's family came and they lived with us and while he was learning the tortilla business. So kind of like, it's one of those things that you do for family to, as obviously in the case of the immigrants that we were surrounded with in our own family, it was really just learning how to become entrepreneurs or learning how to make a life and a business and creating that next generational, that wealth and future.
Yeah. Well, that's definitely impressive. Is it just you and your sister, or do you have other siblings?
No, I'm one of 6. I'm the second
Oh,
of
wow.
6.
That's wild.
Yeah, quite a few of us.
Oh man, that's awesome. So tell me, I did want to dive into one other thing that I mentioned there too on the thing, but you mentioned all these rescue animals. So the dogs, the cat, the horses, like how did you get into rescuing animals?
Well, to be honest with you, I grew up around animals. So my grandfather had a ranch in Mexico, and my mother had recently sent me a photo. I was 2 years old on a donkey. It was something that I remember very vividly being around that ranch and all the animals that were there. But I didn't grow up really loving dogs or domestic animals. That wasn't something that I was really a part of. And in fact, I kind of avoided that for a long time until I met the partner that I'm with now, who has always had multiple cats, multiple dogs, etc. And then it just became like I think when my kids started becoming teenagers and they needed me less and wanted me around less, then
Yeah.
I started gravitating towards animals that would love me no matter what and needed me no matter what. So on the horse front, I always was riding horses kind of growing up in Texas, but also just on vacations and things of that sort. And I tried to always do that every year with my kids. And then I knew that I wanted to have a horse farm. But when I found the property that I bought, there were actually rescue horses on it. And all of a sudden I started investigating and learning more about those rescues, and the 80,000 horses every year are sent to slaughter, and
Yeah.
90% of them are completely fine and have no reason, they're not ill in any way. They have no reason to be slaughtered. So when I started seeing all that, I was like, why would I have a horse farm if I can just rescue horses? So that's kind of how it happened. And for the last 2.5 years, we've been rescuing horses, and it's not a ton because we have 8 right now, but it's like every little bit helps, and it's helping horses from all different types of situations.
That is awesome. I love that. And I love how you said at the end about, it's not a lot, but it's 8, because to those 8, it's a lot,
To those 8, it's a lot. Yes.
I always tell people I had one of I think my largest life lessons, like just light bulb moments, was when I was young. My friends and I made a documentary film on Burma. So there was a genocide going on inside of Myanmar, and on this one group called the Karen. So it's a long story. I won't get into it, but we shot this film. We ran around the jungles for 6 weeks, and we filmed this really cool documentary that ended up getting shown all over the world. But when we were trying to like raise up some awareness, we went to DC for this big conference before the film came out, and we were talking to all these different groups and stuff about the film. And they were there, everyone was there for these different causes, and most of the causes were stuff in the United States. And so I kept getting back this same thing time and time again, which is people would say like, why are you helping these Karen people halfway around the world? Like, we've got problems here. We got this, we got that, we have all these things. And people kept saying that, like, it's just too far away, or it's too this, why not this? And at first it really bothered me. And then I got some advice to ask this one question. And I've done it now the rest of my life, which is I would look right back at him and be like, you know what? Yeah, you're right. There's a lot of stuff going on here. Tell me, what is it you're doing here? What are you doing here to help? Whatever, right? And what I found is that no one that ever asked me that ever had a reason, ever could say something back like, oh, I'm doing this and helping homeless or whatever. They just wanted to like not be involved or complain or whatever and deflect. But at the end of the day, what I learned was just do something. Right? Like, hey, whatever it is, like if you're doing something, positive, like great, do it. If that's what you like, or that's what you like, do it. Because there's too many people who like to talk, but they don't do anything. And that's what I love about, like, hey, it's 8 horses. Someone might say, well, there's 80,000 being killed a year. Well,
yeah,
still 8. right?
Well, and yes, and so fast forward, I hope to be able to do something more with those 8 because horses, there's a lot of equine therapy, and that goes into veterans. It goes in for anxiety. There's a lot of people who actually really need that type of therapy and that comfort from the equine. So there's things that I hope that we can do with these as well that help humans also.
Yes, that would be amazing. So tell me, before we get into the actual asking you stories, which is, I guess, the whole point of the podcast, I do want to know, give us the, so there's gonna be people that don't know you, right? Especially in my audience and new audience for probably a lot of people. So tell us, give us the 10,000 foot view on Fashion Launchpad and Project Verte, just so we're like up to speed.
So first of all, I'm a 3-time CEO, 2-time founder. I've been in the retail industry now for 30 years. So that's kind of high level my career.
So a little bit of
I have I've had corporate experience, entrepreneurial experience. I have gone from, making $17,000 a year to on moving my way on up to a CEO level. I've done a lot of different roles. I also kind of came into the industry at a time where there were training programs and you could actually move from one role to the next role to the next role. And I've traveled all over the country throughout my career because there used to be a lot more retailers, and I traveled everywhere from Edina, Minnesota to Louisville, Kentucky to Chattanooga, Tennessee, you name it, because that was what we did back then. And that experience and everything that I was learning throughout the course of even being an entrepreneur and being a customer service, because to where your point of wearing a lot of hats as an entrepreneur, I was customer service, I was PR, I was dropping off press kits, I was, head of marketing, head of everything, production, et cetera. You learn so much. And so with all of those different lessons and what experiences I've had, I had kind of moved through retail, being CEO and president of brands for the last 12, 15 years of my career. But the last 12 years of those, I was really focused on digital transformation. And that's really because when I started a company with my business partner, Tony Melillo, he and I created a celebrity brand management company. And we had approached creative artist agency, CAA, about Selena Gomez. And they said, great, what do you want to do? We presented this business plan. And fast forward 6 years later, we had a business with her for 6 years that was exclusively for 5 of those years at Kmart. And we had 14 different categories. We had 6 different countries that we had the product in. And it was at a time when e-commerce was really just starting. It was 2009, after the 2008 crash. There was not a lot of emphasis on social media other than Facebook at the time. So, nothing else existed. But during those 5-6 years, everything started changing. And we had the first shop and shop we had on Kmart.com. So we were starting to look at e-commerce and analytics around it. We were starting to see social media, and nobody's better than Selena at being authentic and engaging with her audience. And so much was transitioning, but my focus was like, how do I take legacy businesses and bring them to the digital forefront? We need to be able to move from being just focused on wholesale and brick and mortar stores to being able to be online. And so as we ended our relationship with Selena and that business, I went to become the president of 6 different brands, which ranged from Juicy Couture to BB, BCBG, et cetera. They were all under a holding company. And it was creating more digital and e-commerce. And there went to be the CEO of Diamond Furstenberg and did the same thing. But with all of that, I had been meeting with and doing research on a lot of SaaS software companies and in how we could get closer to the consumer. And one thing that I realized was that there wasn't a lot of focus on the back end and supply chain and logistics from a tech standpoint, as much as had been really innovated on the front end, especially when you look at Shopify and what they've done, just to be able to create a simple way for an accessible way for anybody to be able to not only create a website, but manage a website for their store. That hadn't been done. So when I met Project Verte several years ago, when I was at DVF, we kept having conversations. And so ultimately, Project Verte is a company that is a supply chain technology company. We create technology that helps supply chains where it can be a seamless integration. And what that means is if you are a retailer and you have multiple locations online, you've got potentially your own website. You've got marketplaces like Amazon or Farfetch and others that you're selling on. You've got maybe a brick and mortar store or pop-up. You need to be able to have visibility to seeing all of your inventory one place, all of your sales one place. So you don't have to go onto so many different platforms and take time and hire people just to go through do reporting, so that then you can figure out how much inventory do I need, where do I need to place it, when does it need to be there. So we take all that guesswork away, and with a very simple, easy API integration, we are able to provide an order management system and unified commerce platform that we call it, getting technical and all that. But it's basically one dashboard where you can see everything. So for me, having led businesses where I would have several teams that were siloed out, and this one would have to go get a report from this dashboard, and this one would have to go and look at Google Analytics here, and then they'd have to combine them together, and it would just take days and time. We kind of take all that away and we make it much, much simpler. So as e-commerce has, you guys have a digital business, as e-commerce has been escalating and accelerating at this really incredible rate, the back end has to keep up with it. So everyone's back end, doesn't matter if you're selling groceries, screws, horse supplies, or apparel. Every bit of it still has to get to the consumer. So, and we all know now that we as consumers have become dependent on getting it either within 2 hours or within a day, because now if it's longer than a day, you're like upset.
Yeah.
So Project Verte, as a technology company, we also have a fulfillment warehouse where we actually test out our technologies and we ship product there as well. So that's what I've been into. And that seemed like it was a bit of the last frontier as it relates to what I was able to really get deeply involved in and knowledgeable on from retail, which, as those of us who are in retail understand, that it's a very complicated industry. There's a lot that goes into it, from product development all the way through operations and finance, et cetera. So there's a lot there.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I imagine that it's been kind of hopefully it's been really good for you the last, especially year and a half, 2 years, because at least from pretty much all of my contemporaries and peers and people I know, the pandemic has forced anyone who wasn't doubling down on e-com now has had to, right? So, or they're out of business. And so what I've seen, which has been so interesting in the last year and a half, is that there's had to have been like a forced shift. So there's either been like brick and mortar retailers that had a little bit of e-com that now had to go like all into e-com, or there's been all these DTC players out there that have now realized, well, I also need to be in retail. And then the problems that get caused when you have a business model that's all set for one way and then you add on a whole nother one is oftentimes the reporting and the metrics and the inventory, all this stuff is like a disaster. So I can only assume that you guys are probably doing really well, because I would imagine this software is very helpful for so many different companies, especially now after the pandemic.
Yeah, definitely. Well, and leads me to kind of answer the second part of what your question was, which is about Fashion Launchpad, because exactly what you just said, where so much has changed and accelerated in business in general, and everything now is digital. It doesn't matter what you do, even banking and fintech, and you look at all these different companies that are existing today that didn't exist 2 and 5 years ago. That's why Fashion Launchpad exists. It's a startup, and it is a digital education platform right now focused on retail and fashion, because it's been number one, it's the largest employer in the country of people, and you could be 14 or you could be 80. But number two, because we've had so much transformation and change. And if you look at jobs, you just talked about, people having to learn about e-commerce. Look at the LinkedIn profiles right now that people are looking for. And it all has to do with digital performance managers, e-commerce managers, digital marketing, like it's all of it digital. But a lot of people who've been in the business and the industry who may not have gone to school for it, who may not have had experience on it, need to learn somehow. So I'm a big believer in continuing education, because it's a must for me. My education has been constantly like trying to learn and grow, and not only by doing, but also through learning through others. And I think now education is changing as well, where there's more digital learning. It's online. You've got Coursera as a masterclass, and you've got a lot of those. But the point of what we're doing as Fashion Launchpad is to, whether you're an entrepreneur, whether you're a pre-professional or you're a professional in the industry, you will have courses that are micro courses. So it's micro learning under 10 minutes in videos, and you'll be able to really hear 3 key takeaways in everything. So it could be, what's a line plan, to how do you determine a markup, to let's talk about digital marketing. There's and everything in between. So it's going to be quite robust. We're still in the process of building all of it now, but that's going to be incredible. And I really wanted to do that because last April, when the world felt like it was doom and gloom and everything was falling apart and there were so many companies going bankrupt and people losing jobs, it just felt like it was the right time to go back and say, let's teach someone new skills. Let's reskill and upskill the individuals who haven't had those opportunities. And this is what's going to do that.
That is awesome. I love, I love what you're doing. So it's right up my alley. I was in training and development for 15 years and now still do a lot of it now. But, one of the things that I've just always amazed me is that all the great companies I've worked for over the years, they all had one common thread, which was they invested in training and development. Like they always did. And versus companies I worked for that weren't as successful, it was like the same thing, a thread. Like they didn't want to spend money on trainers or e-learning programs or this or that. And you're like, guys, like, you're not getting it because they want instant ROI. And you're like, no, you need to train your people and continuously train them to get better. And what we're seeing now is that, and I don't know how it is in the fashion industry, because it's not, obviously my industry, but I'm seeing the shift in the consumer psychology is at a rapid pace. So it's like whatever you trained someone last year and the next year, you got to do it all again. Cause like things are changing. They're moving so fast, And so like, I think these micro learnings are perfect because it's easy to handle. Hey, I got 10, 15, 20 minutes. I can learn this. I can go practice it. I can get good at it. But also I think that because of the way people ingest information now, just via TikTok video, like it's constant, is that I think especially a younger generation, that's just how they consume information. So it's like, if you think, oh, I'm going to launch this 4-hour course, no one's going to, it's not going to work, maybe a decade ago, but it just doesn't work now. So I think those quick hits just seem really, really cool. So I'm really excited about that. I'll have to check it out for sure.
Well, I'll be coming to you now that you said that you used to do that as well. I'm going to bring you in, because it doesn't matter what the product is. If you have any product out there, even a mattress, you still have product development, you still have distribution, you still have sales, you still have finance, operations, warehousing, you have all of that you have to determine. So it doesn't really matter if it's an article of clothing or if it's a mattress, you still are talking about product that has to engage with a consumer. And to your point, when I was going to Google summons every 6 months, all of a sudden there was new vernacular every single 6 months. I'd be like, what's going on? And you're having to keep track because things are changing so fast.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I look back now and it's funny. I had one of my jobs, I was there for 3 years and I realized real quick that I didn't have a good way to access the team, but they had tablets. All the retail people had these tablets. And so that I figured out that if I created a SharePoint site, I could actually push videos directly to their tablet. So there'd be 100 people in a store walking around these giant stores and then they could just watch my videos. So I created a channel called Between the Sheets with BT and I just made videos. I think 300 videos I did in 3 years and I just push them out. But it was cool because they were all, 3 minutes, 4 minutes, 90 seconds, 5 minutes, but just constant training. And so what it did is it created this loop, where everyone understood, hey, if I go to here, I'm going to get a quick hit of something cool. And that just became a way to grow the business. And even though it doesn't take that long, if you look back over time and you're like, oh, wow, 300 videos, that's a lot, but
that's
in the moment,
amazing.
It didn't seem like a big deal. It's like, oh, I just shot a video and put it up and it was cool. So, but to your point, I think, that's in my mind is the training kind of platform of the future, is it's just a constant flow,
Well, I say all the time that like you can learn anything on TikTok. This generation, you can learn how to skateboard, you can learn how to cook, you can learn how to sew, you can learn anything in 15 seconds.
It's pretty wild.
So we have to change.
We do, and I think, it's interesting because, my son, he's almost 13. So he's at that age where, I feel like once or twice a day, we're looking at YouTube to figure something out, and like there's never not a time that we look something up and there's not 50 things that tell you how to do it, or even during, I'm sure, you probably dealt with some of this in high school with the kids during the pandemic. But for my kids, it was like, oh my God, when they had to homeschool that year and we're trying to figure out how to do the math. And now the math is all done totally different than how I learned it, and I was like, I don't even know what I'm doing. But then it was like, oh, YouTube. And I'd be like lesson 9.3 and it'd be like 30 videos, like, oh, this is how you do it, And it was like, oh, thank God, because I was just getting so frustrated. Like, this makes no sense.
I remember the days when my kids wouldn't know what I was looking at. And I'd say, hold on just a moment. They'd ask me a question. I'd go and Google it really quickly. And
Yeah.
I'd come back and they thought I was genius, but all of a sudden they caught on.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So tell me, I'll switch gears a little bit. So I love to always just ask a few stories about your career, and I like to start with something just funny or entertaining. Like, is there a story you love to tell, maybe when you were starting out or throughout your career that you love?
Well, probably the one that my kids are so tired of hearing is that I first moved to New York City, not ever having been to New York City before, but having had a job that I was moving for. And I moved to make $17,500 a year, which wasn't a lot when you have to live in Manhattan.
No.
And I literally had to ration like $20 a week because I was still paying off some loans and I had, my rent and whatever else. And so I literally had Mr. Potato, who was the potato street vendor at the bottom of the building where I worked. It was $1. And so my $1 a day potato was what sustained me. And I had 3 jobs for the first 3 years. So I had a day job, an evening job, and a weekend job because that's kind of what I had to do then. But that's why it really kind of motivated me and encouraged me. So my milestones and the things that I was always trying to achieve had to do with, here's what I'm going to make salary wise by this. And then here's what I'm going to hit by this age. So it was salary and title. And that's kind of what kept me moving forward and trying to get to a certain place, so I wouldn't have to eat potatoes for $1 a day.
Yes, I know. I'm still very close with a couple of my roommates from college. Like they live here and we hang out all the time. And we were telling stories to our kids recently. We were all having like a barbecue and we were talking about how we did spaghetti like 4 to 5 nights a week, like legit, because it was like we could get this giant pack for 99 cents. And then I don't even want to know what was in the tomato sauce that we were buying, but it was like, but that was it, and then if we had extra money, we might have something to put in it, every now and again, maybe like some like ground turkey or something. But it was like, yeah, we had spaghetti like 5 nights a week, we're like, hey, you got to do what you got to do when you're young, you're trying to figure it out.
It's so true. You got to do what you got to do. Yes. I impressed my kids with my stories of my 1 night a week pasta outing that I would have. Yes.
So what's interesting though, so we've got we're doing a lot of real estate stuff in New York City and it's really exciting, but it's been funny because we've been meeting with these different brokers and they were saying how there's like all of a sudden this revival right now because all these places became vacant in the city, during the pandemic and Brooklyn and all this stuff. And now they're saying, they're like, well, now they're filling all back up. And so they're like, we have a whole new wave of people like doing just like what you did, right? Coming from the Midwest, whatever it was, like, and saying, I want to try that New York lifestyle. So they're like, every day it's just 1,000 more people coming that are brand new to New York, so it'll be a lot of news stories in 20 years, hopefully of them making it, right?
Yeah, no, that's fun. That's fun to hear. It's good to hear New York's getting back.
Yeah. So tell me, obviously you've had this long career. It went in a lot of different paths. Do you have a story you could tell us about a time when you failed, and kind of how you overcame it? Something that maybe it steered your career a certain way or anything?
Well, I think, yeah. So, listen, there's always failures and there's always successes. And I kind of look at each role in each place that I've been, and there've been both in every one of them. And sometimes, the failures are not failures that are really putting an imprint on your career, but there's certainly mistakes that you're making that are making you grow and helping you to learn so that you don't make those mistakes again. And now I'm able to kind of advise entrepreneurs and small startup businesses as well, because I've been there, done that, and I've made some of those mistakes already. And, it ranges off the top of my head. I don't know that there's I think those failures, the ones that are probably the most impactful to me as a leader, are the ones when you feel like you've failed with an individual or you haven't been able to help. The ones that are most successful are the ones where you see that you've actually been able to impact somebody's career and they've grown and they keep coming back to you. And when you have people that you've worked with multiple times over or for years at a time, and they've really impacted you and you've really impacted them, that to me has been the biggest success.
Yeah, that's cool. And what was it like having worked for these big companies, right? And then, did you have any fears when you broke off and were like, you know what, I want to do something on my own as an entrepreneur?
Oh, absolutely. The reality though was I did that because at the time was going through a divorce and I had 3 kids under the age of 4. They were really little and I needed to be able to make a change in my life because I couldn't travel as much as I was doing, or at least I didn't feel like I could travel have the same level of passion 3 to 5 days a week being on the road and then getting home at 8 o'clock at night because I was in a senior leadership role at a big company. And I just knew I had to make a change. It was hard. And I would say that because my life pointed me in that direction, I had to work really hard even afterwards to get back into corporate, even from being a successful entrepreneur. But you do what you have to do. And that to me was what I wanted to do for my kids and for myself, was to be able to have something that was more flexible so I could be a single mom. I could be at home with them in the evenings and have dinner with them. And I could also, do something that was still keeping me in the industry. But I will say, it is a hard thing. So when I talk to people now and I talk about what would I do differently, I think I wasn't as engaged as I could have been. And I should have probably stayed or could have stayed more engaged in the industry during those years, because it was definitely harder getting back in to a corporate role because we're very siloed. When recruiters
Yeah.
are going out and looking for roles to fill, they're like given a task of find this person from this competitor with this expertise, and that's what they go and look for. They don't always think outside the box because somebody might have a lot more experience or more background, or have created a whole $100 million business a year. They don't always look at that and say, well, that fits the box. So keeping in touch, and now there's so many more communities and organizations that you can be a part of, from female organizations to just groups in general, lunch club being one of them, where you can really stay in touch, stay connected, keep learning, even from a Fashion Launchpad to a masterclass to a Shaw Academy, who I think does great online courses as well. Just stay involved, stay up to date, keep refining your skills, and don't let that get too far away. I get calls a lot from people, women and men both, who've left the industry to go and raise their families and then have a hard time coming back.
Yeah.
So it's just really staying connected and staying alert and aware, because to your point earlier, everything has changed.
Yeah. No, for sure. And I think I love that you said that, because I think, I think it's funny. It's almost a taboo. People don't really talk about it in business, but there are so many single parents that are working, and trying to figure out like that navigation of, dealing with figuring out kids and schools and jobs and work. And when you do this and all this stuff, it becomes really crazy as a single parent. But I always tell people, because I'm a single father, and I'm blessed. My kid's mom is amazing, and we have a great co-parenting situation. But I always say, like, if I had a choice and I was hiring candidates and they were equal, and one was a single parent and one wasn't, I would hire the single parent every single time, because there's a couple things that only I think really happen as a single parent, which is, I think your heightened level of having to succeed is like up here, right? It's like next level, because you're like, this has to work, And then I think too is, especially not, and I wouldn't say this for like single parents where that's it, it's just them and no one else. But if they have especially a spouse, or there's another parent, that's co-parenting with them. At least in my case, I have 3 or 4 nights a week where I don't have my kids, and I've always used that time to dedicate towards like whatever job I'm doing, projects, relationships, things that a lot of my friends don't have time to dip into, which is really interesting, So although my schedule is always crazy and it's just like a roller coaster, I feel like I've always just been so much more dedicated in making sure like I will not fail, and I'm going to show these guys that, you may have troubles, you may have hardships, but it doesn't mean you can't get through all of that. And I want them to see that, right? So no matter what happens when they're adults, they know like I can make it through this and be successful. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And you're 100% right. There is no turning back. So you don't have an option. And that's why, kind of when you ask that question, that's really what motivated me, was the fact that I had these kids. I had to make it work. They've been mine fully, not, they obviously have a father, but in terms of responsibility and with them and all the time. And at the same time, I had all these aspirations for a career. So what's interesting now, and my kids are a little older than yours, is that fast forward, my kids now are in high school and college, and I have all this time that I didn't used to have. So
Yeah.
now I'm so much more busy. I'm doing all kinds of things that I wouldn't really be able to do if I had small kids at home. So you find these different phases of life where you can really dig into your career, entrepreneurial ventures, whatever it is that you want, and whatever that phase of life is. But as your kids do get older, you have a little bit more time to be able to go back in. So I think that's why I take advantage of these incredible opportunities out there to learn and to grow and to keep moving forward.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so last story I'm going to ask you is just about success. So can you tell us a time, like when was a time in your career where you literally had to, maybe it was the day after something happened where you just were like, I cannot believe this is happening right now?
I will say that it really is, and as much as I kind of hate to say this, but at the same time, I have found it to be true. When you have that CEO title, it does change things. And being a female and being a Latina female CEO has changed a lot of things. So for me, when I worked as the CEO of Diane Furstenberg, Diane was actually very, very instrumental in helping me even see what I needed to do and make me feel the responsibility that I had more. Not that I didn't feel it before, but she was like, go out there and tell the story, right? Go out and talk. And it's not my comfort zone. I'm kind of like a social introvert and a professional extrovert, but it wasn't my comfort zone to go out and just talk and go out and really say, like, I'm a Latina, I'm first generation Mexican. I all these things that I really hadn't discussed in my career, because one, as a female, I was just trying to succeed and kind of be part of the C-suite. But the minute that I actually had that conversation with Diane the first time, where she said, go out and you tell your story before somebody else tells it, I was like, that's what I need to do, because it's not about me. It's about the next generation. It's about somebody else who might say, you know what, I can do that too. And I didn't have to go to an Ivy League school, or I didn't have to grow up with a family who has a trust fund, or I didn't have to grow up in a certain part of the country. I can come from a small town in Texas. I can go to a school that no one in New York has ever heard of. I can do these things and still become what I want to be in my life.
That is awesome. I love that. I think,
and that to me, I'll just say, Brett, is like, that's success to me, because at this point, I've been doing what I've been doing in my career for a long time. Yes, you're always going to have to prove yourself. And to what you just said, I'm not going to fail, but I also know that I have a responsibility to be able to help others. And that's what I'm trying to do.
Yeah, I love it. It was interesting. I think we were talking before we started the podcast, but my first season, focused on these different CEOs that, have woven giving back into their business strategy. And so here, a lot of these different CEOs, not all of them, but some of them are extremely wealthy now. They sold their companies or whatever. They're worth hundreds of millions of dollars. And the thing that was so interesting is that they said it in the interviews, like the only thing that really mattered to them was now these foundations and this giving back and how they do it. Like, that's what their life was about now, because I think the message was pretty clear that the money didn't do it for them, especially after a while, and so they realized that changing other people's lives, doing these positive things, having these organizations, that became this fulfillment. And it's hard to top that, and so I think, like what you're saying, is it's so important that we give back to these generations that are coming up. We help teach them things that we didn't know or that we wish we had known, and like put them in a better position. But at the end of the day, I think, as you said, we've got to show people different pathways of success, because the old way of like, I'm going to go to school, I'm going to do this, I get the job, all this stuff like that, not that you can't do that, but it sure seems a lot more like this these days. And I think kids, what's great is that it's not that everyone has the same opportunity, because depending on where you're born, where you live, all these things, you have challenges that can be very difficult. However, we also all have the opportunity to learn the same amount of information. And that's the change. So like I tell my kids all the time is like, at the end of the day, everybody has the opportunity to learn all this different stuff. Some people will go out and get it, and some people won't, and so at least, even though it can be more difficult, when we show people, hey, this is Sandra Campos, this is where she came from, first generation, all these different things, like I think that hopefully motivates a lot of people that like, you know what, maybe my situation's tough, but doesn't mean I can't do it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and you know what? It's never easy. And I tell my kids all the time where nothing was ever handed to me. Nothing's going to be handed to you. You have to go out and get it. So to your point, learn, take advantage of it. Knowledge is confidence. Confidence gives you a voice, gives you the ability to raise your hand at a table, have that voice, and that helps you progress and move in and move up if that's what you want to do in your career. But knowledge to me is gaining that knowledge and really gaining as much knowledge as possible is really pivotal, especially now as things change so quickly. And this new generation is changing everything, because from your kids, Generation Z is not only the new audience or the new consumer, it's also the new workforce, and they're going to force us to change. And because their behaviors, their values, the products, the companies that they align with, it's very different. So I'm excited about that. I'm excited about that, and to see what happens with this new generation and how they help us all kind of change and grow.
Yeah, absolutely. So I know I said 45 minutes, we're already over that. But one last question. So just based on your career, all the things you've done, being, a female executive, being in the C-suite, launching your own businesses, all these different things, like what would be for someone, let's say someone in their 20s, maybe getting out of school or trying to figure out, hey, where do I go as a career? What would be like one piece of advice you'd give someone that is, wants to be successful and doesn't want to set any limits for themselves?
I always heard this, and I don't exactly know what the quote was, but find your community and align yourself with that community. Those that can mentor you may not necessarily just be older than you. You can be mentored, you can learn from anyone. Be a sponge, pay attention, be alert, and really learn and take that in and take advantage of that. I think who your community is will impact you a lot as you grow in your career. Because if that community, or those individuals in that group are also growing and are motivated, it's going to help you grow and be more motivated too. If they're not, it's not going to help you as much. So kind of find that community, be a part of it, listen, learn, take it all in. It doesn't matter how old they are. I learned from a 25-year-old, literally, who is an incredible woman founder as well. But it doesn't matter how old they are or what they do. You can learn from anyone from any industry. And just to me, the biggest lesson is to find your community and to continue to learn.
Awesome. I love it. I love it. So thank you so much. This was great. Just like I said, I learned so much. Didn't know basically any of this stuff, which is awesome. And so
thank you, Brett.
Tell everyone, like, so if anyone was listening and they're interested in Project Vert or Fashion Launchpad, what's the best way to like kind of learn more or get in touch with you or someone at the company?
So first of all, LinkedIn is everything to me. Yeah. I'm obsessed with LinkedIn. So go on LinkedIn and you can find both Project Vert and Fashion Launchpad and me, Sandra Campos, NYC, as well. And that's kind of, if you want to learn more, I would say both those things, to go on LinkedIn and find me there. I will generally, as much as I can, always respond, and very happy to do so.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. I loved it.
Thank you. Have a great day out there today.
I know, you too. Talk soon.
Thank you. Bye.